In the years leading up to 1924, Frank Lloyd Wright and his son were collaborating on projects in Los Angeles. At that time, the elder Wright expressed his dissatisfaction with the present situation. "You are still young enough to be able to own Los Angeles." It was Wright Jr.'s goal to establish himself as a prominent figure in the industry by creating sets for Hollywood productions and infusing the Mayan Revival look into his father's works. When he was given the opportunity to construct the Sowden House in 1926 by his friend John Sowden, who was a photographer, he was able to reach his full potential. In preparation for their move to Los Angeles with their daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, John and Ruth, his wife of 6 years, wanted to purchase a bohemian playhouse in which they could host parties for budding actors and Hollywood types. A big property on the western side of Los Feliz was purchased by the Sowdens. At the time, this neighborhood was home to a number of prominent performers and entertainment moguls. Additionally, it was home to the storybook-style mansions that served as inspiration for the majority of Walt Disney's fairy tale creations. It was the ideal setting for Wright Jr. to design and construct the building, which occupies 5,600 square feet and has 7 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. The structure is constructed out of reinforced concrete and stucco and is supported by a wooden frame. A dramatic and sculptural exterior can be seen on the Sowden House, which is reminiscent of the Hollywood sets that Wright Jr. was famous for designing. The grandeur of the Mayan Revival is not the only thing that the house reflects. It also reflects the Art Deco style, which is characterized by fan-shaped patterns and brutalist characteristics. An imposing presence is added to the front of the home by the absence of any windows, with the exception of a single enormous window that is located over the French entrance doors. Nevertheless, the residence is flooded with light, since it is designed around a central courtyard that serves as the focal point of the whole structure. The plan is really extremely ordered and easy, despite the fact that it seems to be rather complicated and peculiar. It is basically a rectangle with the center cut out, and there are hallways on each side that go to the private rooms on the east and the social areas on the west. Despite the fact that Wright Jr. accomplished a professional success with the house, the Sowden family did not live there for very long. According to the majority of accounts, the family departed because the Mayan Revival style received an excessive amount of criticism. Nonetheless, it is possible that the family left for additional personal reasons. Ruth married her second husband, David Barnett, at the Sowden House, where they stayed until 1936, when they sold the mansion to a real estate developer called Milton Blazier. According to census records, John and Ruth had divorced by the year 1930. Ruth had married David Barnett. The mansion was leased out by Blazier to a number of different people, one of which being James W. Boudwin, a child star during the silent cinema period. Nevertheless, not all Hollywood ties are as sparkling as others. In 1945, Dr. George Hodel, who was one of the primary suspects in the Black Dahlia case, purchased the house and moved in with his third wife, Dorothy, and their 3 boys, Michael, Kelly, and Steve. A highly indulged only kid with a skyrocketing intelligence level of 186, Hodel was born on October 10, 1907, in Pasadena. He was an only child. He received his high school diploma ahead of schedule and attempted to enroll in Caltech when he was 15 years old. However, he was expelled for reasons that are unclear. Family mythology claims that he had an affair with a professor's wife. After deciding to pursue painting, he self-published a paper on the emerging surrealism movement. However, his art career finally failed, which prompted him to go to San Francisco, where he experimented with journalism. Duncan was born to Dr. Hodel and his common-law wife Amelia in the late 1920s. In 1932, Dr. Hodel enrolled at the University of California, Berkeley, as a pre-med student after the birth of Duncan. He was married to another lady by the middle of the 1930s, and the two of them produced a daughter together who they called Tamar. This is around when he enrolled in the medical school at UC San Francisco to study surgery. After receiving his degree, Dr. Hodel divorced Tamar's mother and began working as a physician in a logging camp in Arizona. However, by the early 1940s, he had relocated back to Southern California, where he married Dorothy Houston Hodel and became the chief of venereal disease management for the Los Angeles County Health Department. Around 1 mile away from the Millennium Biltmore Hotel, which is thought to be one of the last locations Short was seen alive before her terrible murder. A week later, in January of 1947, Dr. Hodel also maintained a medical office on First Street in downtown Los Angeles. This clinic was located around 1 mile away from the hotel. Despite the fact that Dr. Hodel and Dorothy had divorced by 1946, she and their kids continued to reside at the Sowden House on an irregular basis. While he was living and working in Shanghai, China, he held the position of Lieutenant General for the United Nations Relief and Reconstruction Administration during the same year. Dr. Hodel said that he would stay in Shanghai until the spring of 1947, in a letter that he sent to Lloyd Wright personally. Dr. Hodel was at the time attempting to persuade Lloyd Wright to work in city planning in Shanghai. In spite of this, he unexpectedly resigned from his position in September of 1946 for personal reasons and then moved back to Los Angeles. Despite the fact that Short and Dr. Hodel lived in close proximity to one another and were involved in similar activities, it wasn't until 1949 that he became a target of the investigators. At that time, his daughter Tamar, who was 14 years old at the time, reported to the authorities that she had been subjected to sexual assault at the Sowden House. During the investigation of the Sowden residence, the authorities found and confiscated a number of pornographic art artifacts as well as images that were considered to be sexually explicit. According to an article that was published in the Los Angeles Mirror in 1949, Dr. Hodel made the following statement: "The action that I was accused of participating in is unclear, and I'm not sure if I was dreaming or if it was real, and if I was being hypnotized or hypnotizing someone else." It was before he sought advice that he made the statement, "These things must have happened." Although the evidence was devastating, Gurge was able to establish a case with the assistance of his highly renowned and successful attorney, Jerry Giesler, and he was ultimately found not guilty in the early 1950s. Giesler was informed by one of the witnesses, a boarder called Joseph Barrett, that Tamar had told him, "This house has secret passageways." This statement was made throughout the course of the case. "I am the one who is responsible for the death of the Black Dahlia. The fact that my father is mad and has a need for blood makes it certain that he will murder me and every other member of this home." This assertion, in conjunction with the allegations of incest that were filed against Dr. Hodel, placed him at the very top of the suspect list that was compiled by the main investigator, Lieutenant Frank Jemison. As a matter of fact, Jemison sent orders for his team to do surveillance on the Sowden House in 1950 when he was questioning him. In the course of the round-the-clock monitoring, several utterances that might be used as evidence against Dr. Hodel were captured on video, and a number of additional witnesses were questioned in order to establish his guilt as the person responsible for the death of Black Dahlia. Dr. Hodel exerted a great deal of effort in order to violently discredit all of the witnesses who claimed that he knew and killed Short. You can read more about it here in the letters from another detective who was sent to the Sowden House for a separate incident. But by 1951, Dr. Hodel had already relocated to Honolulu, leaving behind his family in Los Angeles. In a short amount of time after that, Jemison decided to dismiss the case and exonerate Dr. Hodel, a move that many people find perplexing in light of the evidence that seems to be against him. According to the Honolulu Advertiser, Dr. Hodel remarried and went on to become a psychiatrist at the county hospital. While there, he worked with patients and even taught condemned murderers how to dance the foxtrot. Eventually, he and his fourth wife, Hortensia Stark Hodel, relocated to her home country of the Philippines, where they went on to have a number of further children before ultimately separating. Prior to the couple's relocation to San Francisco in the late 1900s, he had the opportunity to meet June, who would become his fifth and last wife. When Dr. Hodel passed away in 1999, June entrusted all of his belongings to his son Steve, who was a former and accomplished Los Angeles homicide investigator. It was through Steve's acquisition of these belongings that Steve discovered his father was a suspect in the murder of Black Dahlia case short. In the beginning, Steve had the hope that he would be able to clear his father's name. However, in the end, he discovered facts that persuaded him that his father most likely did commit the crime. Steve released the Black Dahlia Avenger in 2003 as a record of his discoveries, which included eyewitness testimonials, a psychological profile, and physical proof. For example, there are construction work invoices that are still on file at the UCLA library that match evidence discovered with Short's mangled remains. The case was never solved, and scholars and historians continue to strive to bring justice to Short's memory. However, experts continue to be divided as to who the perpetrator was. This is mostly owing to the fact that there were a huge number of suspects, evidence that was lost or corrupted, and the inquiry was sensationalized. The renown of Dr. Hodel was sufficient to provide the Sowden House with an aura of notoriety and allegations of haunting due to the presence of ghosts. According to a study that was published in 1969 by the Historic American Building Survey, the owner who took over after Dr. Hodel's term was a lady who turned out to be a representative of Jerry Geisler's office. Geisler was Hodel's previous attorney. Geisler's office sold the Sowden House to Dr. Harold Mazur in 1951, the same year that Dr. Hodel left to Hawaii. It is presumed that Dr. Hodel placed the house up for sale as a kind of payment for the incest trial. One of Dr. Mazur's children moved into the house between the years 1960 and 1980, at which point the Mazur family either leased it out or allowed it to remain vacant. During this time period, the Mazur family resided in the house. Over the course of many years, neighbors in the area stated that the Sowden House seemed to have deteriorated to the point that it appeared to be abandoned. At some point in time, the Mazur family decided to sell the Sowden House to Zorin Balbez, a designer and developer, in the year 2001. Despite the fact that many of the original characteristics have been retained throughout the years, we particularly like the soaring ceiling in the living room and the stained glass ceiling decorations over the fireplace. The interior has been renovated to accommodate contemporary preferences. The masonry was restored by Balbez. The kitchen was extended, the basement was finishing up, and a big swimming pool was installed in place of the little fountain that was located in the center courtyard. Since the refurbishment, the Sowden House has become a popular site for celebrity fundraisers and a background for television, movie, and other commercial productions. This music video for I Dare You by the Entes is one of our favorite Sowden House sightings. The remodeling also brought about a new period of activity at the Sowden House. Perhaps you are familiar with it from the television series I Am the Night, which aired on TNT and starred Chris Pine. The series was based on the book written by Tamar Hodel's daughter titled One Day She'll Darken, and it dramatized the mystery of the Black Dahlia. Those walls, if only they could communicate.